Mom, just die already so we can sell the house and get this over with. Thomas said it so casually, like he was ordering coffee, while I stood frozen in my Newark kitchen, holding the phone with shaking hands. Christmas Eve, 10:23 p.m., and my oldest son had just wished me dead, while his brother Kevin cackled like a hyena in the background. Seriously, Ma, Kevin's slurred voice joined in. You're 78, broke, and pathetic. Nobody wants to pretend we're a happy family anymore. We're at Romano's having a real Christmas without listening to your guilt trips about Dad. I could hear the clink of champagne glasses and his wife's laughter, celebrating my absence like it was a victory. Through my window, I watched the Martinez family across the street, helping their grandmother out of their car. 3 generations walking together toward their warm, bright house. The contrast felt like a knife twisting in my chest. My dining room table sat behind me, set for 4 people who would never come. $347 worth of food growing cold, while my sons toasted my irrelevance at a restaurant I had taken them to for every birthday when they were children. The silence stretched until I heard Thomas whisper to someone, "She's probably crying now. Pathetic." I wasn't crying. I was calculating. My name is Irene Gallagher. I'm 78 years old. And tomorrow, my sons would learn that wishing your mother dead on Christmas Eve is the most expensive mistake they would ever make. But let me tell you exactly how I became the fool they're laughing at tonight. Because every woman watching this needs to know how good sons can turn into monsters who wish their mothers dead. 23 years ago, when Patrick died, saving those kids on Broad Street, Thomas held my hand at the funeral and swore on his father's grave, "Mom, I'll take care of you forever. You'll never be alone." Kevin was crying so hard he could barely speak, but he managed to whisper, "We're all we have left, Mama. We stick together." I believed them. God help me, I believed every lying word. When Thomas was struggling at Rutgers Law, working nights at a gas station, and failing his classes, I didn't just help. I destroyed my future for his. I took the $47,000 Patrick and I had saved for our retirement trip to Ireland, money we'd put away $50 at a time for 15 years, and handed it over without question. But here's what Thomas never told anyone. I also worked 3 jobs. 3. I cleaned offices at night after my bank shifts, and I babysat weekends. I lived on crackers and instant coffee for 2 years, so he could have textbooks and a decent apartment. When he graduated magna cum laude and got hired at that fancy firm in Manhattan, you know what he gave me? A cheap bouquet from the grocery store and a speech about how, "This is just the beginning, Mom. I'm going to make us match." I never saw a penny. But Kevin was the one who really broke my heart. When his landscaping business went under because he spent more time drinking than working, I didn't just co-sign that $23,000 loan. I lied to the bank. I told them I was buying a new car, when really I was covering his gambling debts from Atlantic City. When they came to repossess my Honda, the last gift Patrick ever gave me, I had to borrow money from my church just to keep the lights on. And Melissa, Kevin's wife, that woman looked me dead in the eye last Easter and said, "Irene, you know Kevin only married me because I'm nothing like you, right? He said he wanted a wife who wouldn't end up old and useless." She said it while I was serving the ham I'd bought with my grocery money. In the dining room, I'd painted myself because they said my house looked dated. The worst part? Last year, when I had chest pains and called 911, I was alone in the ambulance while my sons were at a Yankee game with clients. Thomas sent a text from the stadium. Hope you're okay. We'll call later. He never called. Kevin didn't even respond until 3 days later with, were you even really sick or just being dramatic again? I spent 4 hours in the ER alone, listening to other families rushing in to comfort their loved ones, while my sons posted Instagram photos of themselves eating hot dogs and laughing. That night, lying in my hospital bed, I made a decision. I took out my phone and did something I'd never done before. I looked up how much my house was worth. $340,000. I checked my savings account. $67,000 left from Patrick's life insurance. I calculated my Social Security. $892 a month for the rest of my life. Then I did something that chilled me to the bone. I Googled Thomas Gallagher, attorney Newark, and found his firm's website. There he was, smiling in a $2,000 suit, bragging about his six-figure victories and his commitment to family values. The same man who couldn't be bothered to visit his mother in the hospital. That's when I knew. My sons weren't going to change. They were counting on me to die quietly, conveniently, and leave them everything I'd worked for. But as I hung up that phone tonight, listening to them toast my death, I realized something beautiful. They had no idea what was coming. Christmas morning arrived gray and bitter, like God Himself was disgusted with what had happened the night before. I woke up at 5 a.m., not because I wanted to, but because I'd spent 40 years waking up early to make Christmas special for people who now celebrated my absence. The house felt like a tomb. My beautiful dining room table sat there mocking me, still set for 4 people who would never come. The smell of yesterday's cooking hung in the air like a funeral wreath, expensive, elaborate, and completely pointless. But instead of crying, I did something that surprised even me. I laughed. Not a happy laugh, a cold, calculating laugh that would have terrified my sons if they'd heard it. Because while they were probably nursing hangovers and planning how to spend my inheritance, I was about to teach them the most expensive lesson of their lives. I made coffee, real coffee, not the instant garbage I'd been drinking to save money for their gifts, and sat down at my kitchen table with a pen and paper. For the first time in 23 years, I wasn't planning what to cook for someone else or how to stretch my pension to help my ungrateful children. I was planning something else entirely. At 8:47 a.m., my phone rang. Kevin, probably calling to deliver some half-hearted apology so he could still get his Christmas check. Ma? His voice was rough, hungover. Look, about last night. Stop! My voice was so calm it scared me. Before you say another word, Kevin, I want you to know that I heard every single thing you said about me being pathetic, about wanting me dead, about having a real Christmas without me. Silence. Beautiful, terrified silence. Ma, we were drunk. We didn't mean. Yes, you did. And you know what? You were right about one thing. The mother you knew is dead. She died last night while you were toasting her absence. I could hear him scrambling, trying to salvage something. Come on, Ma, don't be dramatic. We can fix this. Maybe next year. There is no next year, Kevin. Not for the mother who gave you everything. She's gone. I hung up before he could respond. 3 minutes later, Thomas called. Always the lawyer, always trying to control the narrative. Mom, Kevin told me you're upset about yesterday. Look, we were stressed. It was poor judgment. Thomas, I interrupted. Do you remember what you promised your father at his funeral? Long pause. Mom, that was over 20 years ago. You said you'd take care of me forever. You swore on his grave that I'd never be alone. Do you remember? His voice got that cold, professional tone he used in court. People say things when they're grieving. We were kids. You were 19, old enough to know what a promise means, old enough to know what honor means, but apparently not old enough to keep either. This is ridiculous. You're being manipulative, just like always. And there it was. The truth he'd been hiding behind fake concern and Christmas cards. I was manipulative for expecting the love I'd earned. I was the problem for wanting my children to care whether I lived or died. You know what, Thomas? You're absolutely right. I have been manipulative. I manipulated myself into believing you were good men. I manipulated myself into thinking blood meant something. I manipulated myself into believing love was unconditional. Mom, but the manipulation ends today. Merry Christmas, Thomas. Give my regards to your girlfriend. I hung up. For the next hour, both sons called repeatedly. I let every call go to voicemail. I could imagine their panic growing with each unanswered ring. They'd spent 23 years taking me for granted, assuming I'd always be there, always forgive them, always enable their selfishness. Today was the day that assumption died. At 11 a.m., I walked to my bedroom and opened Patrick's old lockbox. Inside were all the documents that represented my life's work. My will, leaving everything to Thomas and Kevin. My savings account statements, my life insurance policy with them as beneficiaries. The deed to the house they were so eager to inherit. I picked up each document, read it carefully, and made a decision that would echo through their lives forever. By noon, I had written 2 identical letters, short, simple, and devastating. I placed each letter in a white envelope, the same white envelopes I'd used to send them birthday money for decades. But instead of cash, these envelopes contained something that would haunt them until the day they died. At 12:30 p.m., I walked to the post office on Market Street. Mrs. Patterson, who'd worked there for 30 years, smiled at me like always. Merry Christmas, Irene! Sending holiday cards? I looked at those 2 white envelopes in my hands, one addressed to Thomas Gallagher, attorney at law, one to Kevin Gallagher, and smiled back. Something like that, Patricia, something exactly like that. The next 3 days were delicious torture. I didn't answer my phone. I didn't respond to text messages. I didn't open my door when they showed up. And oh, they showed up. Tuesday morning, Kevin banged on my door for 20 minutes, alternating between fake concern and real desperation. Ma, please, I know you're in there. The Martinez family said they saw you yesterday. I sat in my kitchen, drinking real coffee and reading the newspaper like a woman with all the time in the world. Because for the first time in decades, I did have all the time in the world. I wasn't rushing to make someone else's breakfast or worrying about someone else's problems. Thomas was smarter. He didn't bang on doors like an animal. He sent his assistant to my house with flowers and a card that read, "Thinking of you during this difficult holiday season." The card was signed, Thomas and the team at Gallagher and Associates. Even his apology was corporate and calculated. But Wednesday afternoon brought something that made me realize just how little my sons actually knew me. I was sitting in my living room when I heard voices outside. Through my window, I saw Thomas and Kevin talking to Mrs. Rosa, my neighbor. They were trying to look concerned, but I could see the real agenda in their body language. The way Thomas kept checking his watch, the way Kevin's hands shook like he needed a drink. "We're worried about our mother," Thomas was saying in his best professional voice. "She's not answering her phone, and at her age, we're concerned about her mental state." Mental state. The bastard was laying groundwork to have me declared incompetent. Mrs. Rosa, bless her heart, wasn't buying it. "Your mother seems fine to me. Maybe she just doesn't want to talk to you boys." Even from inside, I could hear the ice in her voice. Kevin tried a different approach. "Has she said anything?" "We had a small disagreement Christmas Eve, and we're trying to make it right." "Small disagreement?" Mrs. Rosa's voice got louder. "Honey, the whole neighborhood heard you boys screaming at that poor woman. Just die already? That's what you call a small disagreement?" The silence that followed was beautiful. I watched through my curtains as both my sons realized their cruelty had witnesses. Their perfect image of concerned children was crumbling in front of someone who'd seen the truth. Thomas recovered first, switching to damage control mode. "Mrs. Herrera, I think there's been a misunderstanding. My name is Rosa Martinez, not Herrera. I've lived next to your mother for 15 years, and you don't even know my name." Her voice could have frozen hellfire. "But you know what? Your mother knows my name. She knows my grandchildren's names. She brings soup when we're sick and watches our house when we travel. She's more family to us than you boys ever were to her." That's when Kevin lost it. "Listen, lady, this is family business. You don't know what you're talking about." "I know enough. I know you boys haven't visited your mother except when you needed money. I know she worked herself to death paying for your education and your business and your fancy lives. And I know she deserves better than sons who wish her dead on Christmas Eve." I watched Thomas grab Kevin's arm, trying to shut him up before he made things worse. But Kevin was past caring about damage control. "She's manipulating you. She's a bitter old woman who can't accept that we have our own lives now. She wants us to feel guilty for not revolving around her anymore." "Kevin, shut up," Thomas hissed. But it was too late. Mrs. Rosa stepped closer to them, all 5 feet of her radiating fury. "You know what's manipulative? Taking an old woman's life savings and then abandoning her. You know what's bitter? Celebrating your mother's absence like it's a victory. And you know what's really sad? She's sitting in that house right now, probably still hoping you boys will remember you have hearts. But she was wrong about that last part. I wasn't hoping for anything anymore. I was just waiting for those white envelopes to arrive." Thursday morning, I heard Kevin's truck screech into my driveway at 7 a.m. Car doors slammed, feet pounded up my front steps, and fists hammered on my door with the desperation of men who finally understood they'd crossed a line they couldn't uncross. "Ma, open the door! We got your letters!" I smiled and turned up the volume on my morning talk show. The letters had arrived. Let the real games begin. "What the hell is this?" Kevin's voice cracked like a teenage boy's as he screamed through my front door. I could hear papers rustling. He was waving those white envelopes around like evidence at a crime scene. Thomas was quieter, more controlled, but I could hear the tremor in his voice when he spoke. "Mom, we need to talk. Open the door. Now." For the first time in 3 days, I walked to my front door. I didn't open it. I just stood there, listening to my son's panic on the other side of the wood that separated the old me from the new me. "The letters," I said clearly, knowing they could hear me. "Did you read them carefully?" It's just blank paper. Kevin was hyperventilating. Just blank paper with some crazy message about inheritance. What kind of sick joke is this? It's not a joke, Kevin. It's a preview. I heard Thomas take a shaky breath. When he spoke, it was in his courtroom voice, the one he used when he was losing a case and trying to regain control. Mom, I don't know what you think you're accomplishing, but sending blank papers doesn't change anything legally. Your will is still valid. Your assets were still yours, I corrected. Past tense, Thomas. Just like the mother you knew. The silence that followed was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. It was the sound of two grown men realizing they'd underestimated the woman they'd spent decades dismissing. What do you mean, were? Kevin's voice was barely a whisper. I pressed my face close to the door, making sure they could hear every word. I mean, that while you were toasting my death at Romano's, I was making some changes. Changes that took effect the moment those blank pages arrived in your mailboxes. You can't just change your will without, Thomas started. I didn't change my will, honey. I eliminated the need for one. The sound that came from Kevin was somewhere between a gasp and a sob. What does that mean? Ma, what does that mean? It means I gave it all away. The house you've been planning to sell, the savings account you've been counting on, the life insurance policy you were hoping would pay off your debts. Gone. Every penny, every asset, every single thing you thought you'd inherit. I donated it all. The silence stretched so long, I wondered if they'd collapsed. Then, Kevin exploded. You can't do that. That's our money. We're your sons. I actually laughed, a sound that seemed to echo through the door and slice into their hearts. Your money? Kevin, sweetie, you've been spending my money for 23 years. I just decided to stop letting you. Mom. Thomas's voice was shaking now, all professional composure gone. Mom, please. We can fix this. Whatever you've done, we can undo it. We can talk to the charity, explain there was a misunderstanding. The New Jersey Housing Fund for Abandoned Elderly, I said clearly. That's where it went. Every asset I owned is now helping old people whose children actually give a damn about them. I heard one of them, probably Kevin, punch something. My door shuddered. You vindictive old bitch, Kevin screamed. You've ruined everything. How could you do this to your own family? Family? I let that word hang in the air like poison gas. Kevin, baby. Family doesn't abandon each other at Romano's. Family doesn't wish each other dead on Christmas Eve. Family doesn't celebrate when someone is absent from the table. We were drunk, Thomas was pleading now. We didn't mean it. You can't destroy everything because of one stupid night. One night? My voice rose for the first time, all the rage of 23 years finally breaking free. One night? This wasn't one night, you selfish bastards. This was 23 years of using me like an ATM. 23 years of taking everything I had and giving nothing back. 23 years of treating me like an embarrassing burden you couldn't wait to inherit from. The sound of crying came through the door. Kevin, I realized, crying like the child he'd never stopped being. But here's the beautiful part, I continued, my voice dropping back to that deadly calm. You got exactly what you wanted. The mother you knew is dead. And just like you always planned, you're finally free of her. I walked away from the door, leaving my sons sobbing on my front porch like the orphans they'd made themselves. That afternoon, I sat in my empty house and felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. Peace. Not happiness, not satisfaction, just the deep, bone-deep peace of a woman who had finally stopped carrying other people's burdens. My phone rang every 5 minutes. Text messages flooded in. I could hear cars pulling up outside as my sons returned again and again, like moths drawn to a flame that would only burn them. But I had other business to attend to. At 3 p.m., I called Father Miguel at St. Patrick's. His warm voice answered on the second ring, speaking in the gentle tone he reserved for parishioners in crisis. Irene, how are you, my dear? I missed you at Christmas Mass. I'm better than I've been in years, Father, but I need to ask a favor. Of course, anything. This Sunday, I'd like to make an announcement to the congregation about my recent donation to the housing fund. I think the community should know how their generosity can make a real difference. There was a pause. Father Miguel was no fool. He could hear the steel beneath my polite request. Irene, are you sure? Sometimes family matters are best kept private. Father, my family matters became public the moment my son screamed at me loud enough for the entire neighborhood to hear. I'm just making sure the story gets told correctly. I see. And what would you like to tell the congregation? The truth, that sometimes the family we choose is more important than the family we're born into. That sometimes an old woman has to save herself because no one else will. When Sunday came, I dressed in my best blue dress, the one Patrick had bought me for our anniversary 5 years before he died. I walked into St. Patrick's with my head high, carrying a folder of documents and a story that would change everything. The church was packed, as it always was, on the Sunday after Christmas. I saw familiar faces from 40 years of attending this parish. Mrs. Patterson from the post office, the Martinez family, even some younger families I'd watched grow up over the decades. I also saw Thomas and Kevin sitting in the back pew, looking like two men attending their own execution. When Father Miguel called me to the podium during announcement time, the church fell silent. I could feel everyone's attention, but I wasn't nervous. I'd spent 43 years handling other people's money at the bank. I knew how to speak clearly and factually about financial matters. Good morning, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the church's acoustics. My name is Irene Gallagher, and I've been a member of this parish for 4 decades. This week, I made the largest donation in my life to the New Jersey Housing Fund for Abandoned Elderly. I paused, letting that sink in. I could see people leaning forward, interested, but not yet understanding why this mattered. I donated my house, my savings, and my life insurance policy, everything I owned, because I realized I was already living the life those abandoned elderly face every day. The only difference was I had the power to do something about it. A murmur rippled through the congregation. I could see Thomas starting to stand up, but Kevin grabbed his arm and pulled him back down. You see, I learned something important this Christmas. I learned that family isn't defined by blood or obligation. Family is defined by love, respect, and presence. Family is the people who show up when you need them, not the people who wish you were dead so they could inherit your house. The murmur grew louder. Several people turned to look toward the back of the church, where my son sat frozen in mortification. For 23 years, I gave everything I had to children who saw me as a bank account with legs. I sacrificed my retirement, my security, and my dignity for sons who celebrated Christmas by toasting my absence and wishing for my death. Now the entire congregation was staring at Thomas and Kevin. I watched my successful lawyer son and my businessman son shrink into their pew like scolded children. But this Christmas, I learned that I have a real family right here in this room. People who visit when I'm sick, who know my name, who include me in their celebrations. People who see me as a human being worth loving, not a burden to be endured. I looked directly at my sons for the first time since this nightmare began. So thank you, Thomas and Kevin, for teaching me the difference between being wanted and being used. Your Christmas gift to me, your honest hatred, was exactly what I needed to set myself free. The aftermath was swift and brutal. As soon as Father Miguel dismissed the congregation, the church erupted into whispered conversations and not so subtle stares at my sons, who sat in their pew like deer caught in headlights. Mrs. Martinez was the first to reach me, wrapping me in a hug that smelled like vanilla and righteousness. Mija, you are so brave. So brave. Behind her came a line of parishioners, people I'd known for decades, people who'd watched me struggle and sacrifice for children who never seemed grateful. Mrs. Patterson from the post office squeezed my hand. The O'Sullivan family, whose teenage daughter I'd tutored in math for free, thanked me for my courage. Even Father Miguel's elderly mother, who rarely spoke to anyone, patted my cheek and whispered, "Good for you, dear. Good for you." I watched Thomas and Kevin try to leave through the side door, but their path was blocked by parishioners who suddenly had very cold shoulders and very judgmental eyes. These were people who'd known our family for decades, who'd heard about Patrick's heroism, who'd watched me work myself to exhaustion while my sons prospered. Kevin tried to approach me once, his face red with shame and desperation. "Ma, please, can we just—" "No!" Mrs. Martinez stepped between us like a tiny, furious guardian angel. "You had your chance to talk to your mother. 23 years of chances. Now you listen to what the community thinks of boys who wish their mothers dead." I didn't stick around to watch them face the consequences. I had other business to attend to. That afternoon, I drove to the New Jersey Housing Fund offices in downtown Newark. The director, a kind woman named Sarah Chen, welcomed me with tea and genuine gratitude. "Mrs. Gallagher, your donation is extraordinary. It will house 12 elderly residents for an entire year. But I have to ask, this is everything you own. Are you sure about this?" I looked around her office, at the photos of smiling elderly residents in clean, safe apartments, and felt more certain than I'd felt about anything in decades. "Sarah, I've been homeless for years. I just happened to have a roof over my head while it was happening. Those people in your photos, they have something I never had. People who care whether they live or die." She leaned forward, understanding dawning in her eyes. "What will you do now? Where will you live?" "I'm moving into St. Mary's Senior Community next month. It's income-based housing for people with limited resources, which, thanks to my generous donation, now includes me." I smiled at the irony. My Social Security will cover the rent and basic expenses. For the first time in my adult life, I'll be living within my means instead of constantly giving away money I couldn't afford to lose. That evening, I packed my belongings. Not the furniture. That belonged to the house, which now belonged to people who needed it. Just my personal items, Patrick's photos, my jewelry, the few clothes I actually liked, instead of the ones I thought made me look like a proper mother. As I packed, my phone rang constantly. Thomas, then Kevin, then Thomas again. Voice messages filled with panic anger, threats about contesting the donation, promises they couldn't keep about changing their behavior. I listened to each message once, then deleted it. Their desperation was like music, the sound of chickens finally coming home to roost. The last message was from Thomas's law firm, his assistant, speaking in that crisp, professional tone. Mrs. Gallagher, Mr. Gallagher would like to schedule a meeting to discuss reversing your recent financial decisions. He believes there may have been some coercion or diminished capacity involved. I called back immediately. Tell Mr. Gallagher that I'm 78 years old, not dead. My capacity has never been clearer. I spent 43 years as a bank teller handling other people's money without making a single error. I think I can manage my own financial decisions. I paused, then added the knife twist. Also, tell him that if he attempts to contest this donation, I'll be happy to provide the housing fund's lawyers with recordings of him and his brother wishing me dead on Christmas Eve. I may be old, but I'm not stupid. I've been recording our conversations since Christmas morning. I wasn't bluffing. I really had been recording them. The phone calls stopped. Moving into St. Mary's senior community was like waking up from a 23-year nightmare. My new apartment was small, just a bedroom, sitting area, and kitchenette. But it was mine. No one expected me to cook dinner for ungrateful children. No one demanded money I didn't have. No one made me feel guilty for existing. On my first morning there, I woke up naturally at 7:30 a.m. instead of the 5 a.m. I'd trained myself to get up for decades of cooking breakfast, for people who rarely said thank you. I made coffee, real coffee, not instant, and sat by my window watching the sunrise paint the Newark skyline gold and pink. For the first time in decades, I had nowhere to be and nothing to prove. My neighbor across the hall was Elena Rodriguez, an 82-year-old former school principal whose children lived in California and actually called her twice a week. She knocked on my door that first afternoon with homemade empanadas and a smile that reached her eyes. "Welcome to paradise," she laughed, settling into my small chair like we'd been friends for years. No ungrateful children, no guilt trips, no pressure to be anyone but ourselves. "How did you know?" I asked. "Honey, we all have a story. Mine just has a happier ending than most." She bit into an empanada. "Plus, your story was in the Newark Star Ledger yesterday. Local woman donates everything to help abandoned elderly." "You're famous." I nearly choked on my coffee. "The newspaper? Front page of the local section. Someone at your church must have called them. The article quotes several parishioners talking about your sacrifice and your son's behavior. It's not pretty for those boys." That evening, Elena knocked again, this time with a tablet computer. "You need to see this," she said, pulling up the newspaper's website. "Look at the comments. Hundreds of them. Strangers from across New Jersey sharing their own stories of ungrateful children, expressing admiration for my courage, sharing the article on their social media. Some comments made me cry, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that I wasn't alone. My son hasn't called in 3 years, but he asked for money last month for a vacation. This woman is my hero. I wish I had her courage. Those boys should be ashamed. Their father was a hero and they turned out to be zeros. Within a week, I'd received over 50 letters forwarded from the newspaper. Women mostly, sharing their own stories of children who took everything and gave nothing back. Some included small donations to the housing fund, in honor of Irene Gallagher's courage. But the most surprising development came 2 weeks later. I was in the community room playing cards with Elena, and two other residents when Sarah Chen from the Housing Fund arrived with a visitor. A well-dressed woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a professional bearing. Mrs. Gallagher, I'd like you to meet Janet Morrison from Channel 7 News. She'd like to interview you about your story. Janet sat across from me, her manner respectful but direct. Mrs. Gallagher, your story has resonated with thousands of people. We're doing a segment on family abandonment of elderly parents, and your courage in speaking out has inspired many others to share their experiences. The interview aired on a Thursday evening. I watched it in the community room with 20 other residents, all of us gathered around the big screen TV like it was the Super Bowl. Seeing myself on television was surreal, but hearing my story told alongside statistics about elderly abandonment, financial abuse by family members, and the growing crisis of seniors aging alone was sobering. I wasn't just one bitter old woman. I was part of an epidemic that no one wanted to discuss. The interview ended with Janet asking what I wanted people to know. I want them to know it's never too late to save yourself, I said, looking directly into the camera. I want them to know that family is about love and respect, not blood and obligation. And I want them to know that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from people who treat you like you don't matter. After the segment aired, my phone started ringing again. But this time, it wasn't my sons calling to threaten or manipulate. It was other seniors thanking me for speaking their truth. 6 months later, I sat in the same community room where I'd watched myself on television. But now, I was surrounded by a dozen other women who'd found the courage to change their own stories. What had started as informal coffee conversations about our ungrateful children had evolved into something beautiful. A support group for seniors who'd chosen self-respect over family obligation. Elena called us the Liberation Club, though officially we were just the Thursday morning coffee group. Today's meeting was special because it was my 79th birthday, the first birthday in 23 years that I'd celebrated exactly how I wanted to celebrate it. Tell us again about the letters, asked Margaret, a 74-year-old former nurse whose daughter had stolen her credit cards and maxed them out for a vacation to Europe. I smiled, reaching into my purse for the folder I'd carried to every meeting for months. Inside were letters from across the country, hundreds of them now, from seniors who'd heard my story and found their own courage. This one's from Dorothy in Oregon, I said, pulling out a letter written in careful script. She writes, Dear Irene, after 40 years of being my son's personal ATM, I finally closed the bank. I sold my house, moved into senior housing, and donated the rest to animal shelters. My son called me selfish. I told him he was absolutely right. I'd finally learned to be selfish with my love, giving it only to those who deserved it. The group murmured approval. These stories had become our gospel, proof that it was possible to rewrite the ending of your life story, even when you thought it was too late. What about your sons? Asked Helen, whose question had become a weekly ritual. Any word from Thomas and Kevin? I folded Dorothy's letter carefully before answering. Kevin called last month, first time since the church incident. He wanted to know if I was ready to forgive and move on. I told him forgiveness isn't about forgetting what someone did to you. It's about releasing the hold their actions have on your life. I forgave them both the day I sent those white envelopes. But moving on? Elena prompted, knowing the rest of the story. Moving on requires change, and they haven't changed. They still see me as the problem, not their behavior. Thomas actually asked if we could put this whole dramatic episode behind us for the sake of family unity. I laughed, but there was no bitterness in it anymore. They still don't understand that they killed the family when they wished me dead. You can't resurrect something you murdered with your own hands. The truth was, I thought about my sons every day. Not with anger, that had burned away months ago, but with the kind of sadness you feel for strangers whose lives took tragic turns. They were my children, and I'd always love the little boys they used to be. But I could no longer pretend they were the men I'd hoped they'd become. Do you ever regret it? Margaret asked, giving everything away. I looked around the room at these remarkable women who'd chosen dignity over desperation, who'd chosen self-respect over family approval. At 79, I was surrounded by more genuine love and friendship than I'd experienced in decades. The only thing I regret, I said slowly, is waiting so long to do it. That evening, as I prepared for bed in my small, perfect apartment, I received a phone call that surprised me. Father Miguel, calling to check on me as he did every few weeks. Irene, I have some news you might want to hear. Thomas and Kevin haven't been to church since your announcement. But more importantly, 3 families in our parish have started a fund to help seniors escape financial abuse from their own children. They're calling it the Irene Gallagher Freedom Fund. I sat down hard on my small sofa, overwhelmed by the realization that my pain had become someone else's pathway to freedom. Father, do you think I did the right thing? Speaking out like that? His voice was warm with certainty. Irene, I've been a priest for 37 years. I've seen families destroy each other in the name of love, and I've seen love destroy families in the name of obligation. What you did took the kind of courage most people never find. You didn't just save yourself. You gave permission for others to save themselves too. After we hung up, I walked to my window and looked out at the Newark skyline. Somewhere out there, my sons were living their lives without the burden of a demanding mother. And somewhere out there, other seniors were finding the courage to demand better from the people who claimed to love them. At 79, I'd finally learned the most important lesson of my life. Real family doesn't abandon you at Romano's restaurant. Real family doesn't wish you dead on Christmas Eve. Real family doesn't celebrate your absence. Real family shows up. And when they don't, you have the right to find family that will. If you're watching this and you see yourself in my story, I want you to know something. You are not alone. You are not wrong. And you are not too old to change your life. For months after my story aired, I received thousands of messages from people who felt trapped in the same cycle of giving everything and receiving nothing. Parents who'd sacrificed their retirement savings for children who now treated them like burdens. Grandparents who provided free childcare for families who couldn't spare an hour for a phone call. Seniors who lived in fear of being abandoned if they stopped being useful. If that's you, please listen to me carefully. Your value as a human being is not determined by what you can provide for other people. Your worth is not measured by your willingness to bankrupt yourself for the sake of family peace. Your love is not proven by your tolerance for disrespect. The hardest part of my journey wasn't giving away my money or leaving my house. The hardest part was accepting that I deserved better. At 78, after a lifetime of putting everyone else first, I had to learn that wanting respect wasn't selfish. It was human. You don't have to make the same dramatic gesture I made. You don't have to donate everything you own or make announcements in church. But you do have to stop accepting unacceptable behavior. You do have to stop funding your own mistreatment. You do have to stop apologizing for wanting to be treated with basic human dignity. Start small. The next time someone treats you poorly and then expects you to pretend it didn't happen, don't pretend. The next time someone asks for money while treating you like an inconvenience, say no. The next time someone celebrates your absence, let them enjoy it permanently. It will be hard. They will call you selfish, manipulative, dramatic. They will tell you that family is family and you should forgive and forget. They will promise to change if you'll just give them one more chance. They will make you feel guilty for having boundaries. But here's what I learned. People who truly love you don't need to be trained to treat you with respect. People who genuinely care about you don't need to be threatened with consequences to include you in their lives. People who really see you as family don't wish you were dead. The Liberation Club here at St. Mary's now has 37 members, 37 seniors who found the courage to choose dignity over dysfunction. We share resources about senior housing, legal aid for elder abuse, and most importantly, we remind each other daily that we are worth more than we were settling for. Some of our members have reconciled with family members who genuinely changed their behavior. Others, like me, have built new families from the people who actually show up when we need them. All of us sleep better at night, knowing we're no longer funding our own mistreatment. If my story has touched you, I want you to do 3 things. First, share this story. Not for me, but for the millions of seniors who think they have no choice but to accept disrespect from the people they love most. Share it so they know they're not alone and they're not powerless. Second, if you're a parent or child watching this, take a hard look at your own family relationships. Are you showing up for the people who've shown up for you? Are you treating your parents or children with the respect they deserve? Are you taking someone's love for granted because you know they'll forgive you no matter how badly you behave? Third, if you know a senior who's being mistreated by their family, speak up. Don't assume it's not your business. The community support I received gave me the courage to change my life. Sometimes all it takes is one person saying, "You deserve better," to help someone find their strength. Remember, real family doesn't abandon you when you need them most. Real family doesn't celebrate your absence. Real family doesn't wish you were dead so they can inherit your house. Real family shows up, and when they don't, you have every right to find family that will. My name is Irene Gallagher. I'm 79 years old, and I've never been happier to be alive. Not because my life is perfect, but because it's finally mine. If you found strength in my story, please subscribe to this channel, share this video, and leave a comment telling us about your own journey towards self-respect. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to find their own courage. And remember, it's never too late to save yourself. It's never too late to demand better. It's never too late to choose dignity over desperation. The mother who waited for ungrateful children is dead. The woman who lives now belongs only to herself, and she's never going back. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. And thank you for reminding me that real family, the kind that truly matters, can be found anywhere love and respect exist.